Hello there, and welcome to another live stream. So, yeah, it's Friday. It's bitter and cold outside, but we are going to talk about Microsoft DevBox. So, yeah, hopefully we will get some warmth. The format is the same as it's been a couple of last live streams. I will do a presentation, talk about the service in question, and then we will have some demos. And at the end, we will have Q&A. So do drop any questions that you might have down in the chat. I guess it's chat now, not comments, right? So yeah, leave them down in the chat and I'll try to answer them as best as I can when we get to the Q&A section. But yeah, like I said, topic is Microsoft DevBox. And the agenda is pretty much what it's been in this live stream. It's the what, the how, the why, some demos, talk about how much this all costs, and then of course the Q&A at the end. So let's jump right in, shall we? Let's talk about what exactly is Microsoft DevBox. And to simplify it as much as I can, it is virtual PCs. So if that sounds familiar, then yeah, this is in fact the exact same slide as I used in my previous live stream about the Windows 365 service, because DevBox is built on Windows 365, so it's very similar in what the essence of the service is. And yeah, I guess Microsoft doesn't really like calling things for what they are, because with Windows 365 you got cloud PCs, but in essence they were just, virtual machines. And in DevBox, they are called DevBoxes, but they are still just virtual machines. But yeah, let's get a little more detailed. And with the DevBox service, you get personal DevBoxes. You get something that is highly customizable. It's really heavily relying on self-service, and it is tightly integrated. And what I mean is with this is that the personal DevBoxes, all the DevBoxes or virtual PCs, they are personal, unlike, for example, Azure Virtual Desktop, where you can do multi-session. So they are personal, and you can do whatever you want to the DevBoxes that you own. You don't have to worry about someone installing a piece of software that is conflicting with yours, for example. You don't have to worry about someone logged in to do the same DevBox as you, hogging all the resources. None of that matters because it's personal, it's yours and yours alone. And with highly customizable, I don't just mean the DevBoxes themselves. The service itself is also highly customizable in that you can configure it in some different ways and you can tweak it to your liking quite a lot. The DevBoxes themselves are, of course, highly customizable. After you have provisioned one, you can do pretty much what you want to it, but it is also highly customizable before you provision it in the images that you provision them from, for example. The service relies quite heavily on self-service. With Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365, the IT admins did pretty much everything, but in the DevBox service, the self-service is not only for the users, but it's also for roles like the dev or team leads. So the self-service aspect is more than just the users consuming the service itself. It is also for provisioning DevBoxes. It's for configuring projects and pools and so on. Hello, Patrick, and it should be in 1080p if you're asking if it's only in 144p. But other than that, I really don't know why it would be something else. Sorry about that. But yeah, let me just quickly check. No, on my test laptop, it is in fact in 1080p. Yeah, continuing on, the tightly integrated part here is that the DevBox itself is tightly integrated in the rest of the Microsoft sphere. The dev boxes themselves, they are automatically enrolled into Intune, for example. And it works good with, all the other stuff within the Microsoft sphere. So, the users that you have in Azure AD, that you have for Microsoft 365, they can be used for dev boxes as well. But there's a couple of other things that, is around the DevBox services. Oh, come on. You have the delegation of tasks. You can opt to bring your own images or not. You have to bring your own infrastructure, and it's based around the idea of disposable dev boxes. So with delegation of tasks, I mentioned that users don't only consume the service, they actually have some tasks of their own. So I mentioned creating dev boxes. That is a task that is now moved from the IT admins and to the users themselves. The users can also delete their dev boxes if they want, but there's also other roles that have some tasks involved in DevBox, and those are, for example, team leads, project leads, people managing teams, basically. So they also have a set of tasks in the DevBox service. They have to provide access to the users, for example. So the IT admins aren't, rid of all of their tasks. They do have quite a lot of tasks in the DevBox service as well, but the service itself is centered around, delegating and moving tasks away from the IT admins closer to the user itself. And you can opt to bring your own images into the dev boxes, which is, one of its key features. It is kind of what it makes the service shine, because you can have multiple types of dev boxes with different software installed and different connections and so on. But you can also make use of the standard Azure Marketplace images in DevBox if you so want. So you bring your own images if you want, or you can also use the Azure Marketplace images. And one thing you have to bring for yourself is the infrastructure. Unlike Windows 365, there is no option to use a Microsoft managed net. You have to use your own VNet. But then, of course, that also gives you a lot of options in terms of flexibility in how you want to set it up. Again, back to the highly customizable part. The disposable word here is for the entire idea of DevBox is that you create a DevBox, you do what you need to do in that DevBox, and then when your task is done, you delete it. And then the next time you need to perform a similar task, you create a new DevBox. So the DevBoxes themselves aren't meant to last. They aren't meant to be run 24/7, for example. They are meant to be disposable. So you create them, you do your thing, then you delete them. So that's kind of what defines the service. So let's move on over to the how. How does DevBox work? And you have a couple of central components of a DevBox setup. You have one or multiple dev centers, which contain one or multiple projects. And within the projects, you have one or multiple DevBox pools. And these DevBox pools are put together based on DevBox definitions. So there's a lot of components here, and they fit together in different kinds of ways. So I made this drawing or diagram depicting how these different components fit together. So like I said, you have one or multiple dev centers, and within those, you have one or multiple projects. And within the projects, you have one or multiple DevBox pools. Now, the DevBox definitions, they are actually the responsibility of the IT admins. So the DevBox definition, they define what SKU should the dev boxes be created based on, and what image should the dev boxes be based on. So this is something that the IT admins then make available for the project managers or team leads to use when they are defining a dev box pool. And the SKU is basically the CPU and RAM and storage that the dev box should have. The image, like I said, can be whatever you bring yourself, or you can make use of the Azure Marketplace images if you want to do that. And then you have network connections, which dictate, what VNet should the dev boxes be connected to. Should they be joined to Azure AD, or should they be hybrid joined? There is no option to only join them to AD. They need to be either Azure AD or hybrid joined. And of course, based on the VNet, you also get the region where your dev boxes should be deployed. So the network connection, together with the dev box definition, they define how the dev boxes should be, created and how they should look. And based on this drawing here, you can say that the project managers, the team leads, whoever is, managing that team, they are responsible for the purple parts here. So that would be this part here. That's managed by the project managers or team leads or what have you. But the dev box definitions and network connections are not something that the project managers or team leads create. The dev box definitions are created by the IT admin and are actually per dev center. So they are basically contained in the dev center, but can then be attached to or added to a project. The network connections, however, are global, so they can be used across multiple dev centers if you want to. And so this is kind of how all these parts fit together to make the dev box service. So there's a couple of other features that you should know about, and that is, for example, the shared control plane. I mentioned that it is built on Windows 365, and if you are familiar with that service, then you know that the Windows 365 has a control plane that it shares with Azure Virtual Desktop, meaning that when I say that DevBox does have a shared control plane, that is shared across Azure Virtual Desktop, it's shared across Windows 365 and across the DevBox service, and not only across your setup, but across all customers of Microsoft. So the control planes are located in various regions, Azure regions around the world. Not all Azure regions, but a lot of them. So you could refer back to a drawing I made for the Windows 365 setup, because with the dev boxes it would be pretty much the same, as in, how does a connection work? So as you can see on the right side here, you have a couple of different types of endpoints. You have clients for Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. If you are on Linux, you can use the web access, but the self-service features of DevBox is only available in the web browser. So you need to have a relationship with the web browser, no matter if you are using a client or not. So you access the service from your client or the web browser, and like with Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop, it's really two kinds of sign-ins here. You have the first sign into the service, and then you have to sign into your dev box, or as it is called in this picture, the Cloud PC, because this is from a Windows 365 setup. So I can make it a bit bigger, I guess. So like so. And from your clients or your web browser, you sign into the service, the DevBox service. That sign-in is through your Azure AD account, so that can be secured by using conditional access, identity protection, and so on. And then the control plane, which DevBox shares with Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktops, communicates with the DevBoxes themselves. So when you try to log in to your dev box, you need to sign into that dev box. So that is the second sign in this manner. So this is an example of, how it can look. You can see that the dev boxes or cloud PCs in this drawing is connected to a VNet. This can be set up however you want. So you can add a hub and spoke setup, for example, or a connection to your on-prem environment if you so want. But this is the simplest you can set up the DevBox service, network-wise. You have the option to bring your custom images. And the neat thing about the custom images here, as opposed to, for example, Windows 365, is that they make use of the Azure Compute Galleries. So if you are already making use of the Azure Compute Galleries, that would probably be your IT admins, but then you can continue to make use of the Azure Compute Galleries and attach them to your dev centers or DevBox service in order to have those images used to create your dev boxes. The images themselves they have the same requirements as the Windows 365 images. So that would be, it's a generation 2, needs to be Windows 365 Enterprise and single session, not multi-session, and so on. But yeah, the images are a bit easier to manage for your IT admins in the service, at least in my opinion, because you make use of the Azure Compute Galleries. You store your images there, and when they need to update an image, they update the image in the Compute Gallery, and then every project or DevBox pool making use of that Azure Compute Gallery can then automatically make use of the new image as well, or new version of an existing image, for example. So the imaging part is a lot better in the DevBox service as compared to the Windows 365 service, at least in my opinion. And then we have to discuss the why, and not why the DevBox service exists, but why should we care about DevBox? And these are highly personal opinions, but I'll try to clarify. The service is really effective, both from a user's perspective and from an IT admin's perspective, a team lead's perspective. So really, from an entire organization's perspective, it is really effective because it cuts down on time to deliver on a lot of stuff. For example, the users. They can spin up their own dev boxes as soon as they have access. They can spin them up, and they don't have to wait for the IT admin to spin up a new VM for them, or they don't have to travel around with big laptops with tons of power to run their own VMs, for example. They can spin up a dev box in the browser, do their thing, and then delete the dev box, for example. So it's effective in a time manner for the users because, they can do whatever they want to do, when they want to do it, where they want to do it. From a team lead, product lead, if you manage a team of devs or users, it is also an effective tool because you yourself assign access to your projects. So as soon as a new hire gets their user count, you can add them to your project, and then they can start creating dev boxes and actually start to work. You don't have to wait for the IT department to prepare a cluster or something like that to have your VMs on. It's all running in Azure, so as soon as the IT admins have provided you with an image and a project, then you are good to go. You can assign access to your users. You can have control over the amount of costs because you can override your devs or users if they forget to turn off their dev boxes, for example. Then you can go ahead and turn them off for you. So the team leads, project manager, they get a lot more work done without having to wait for the IT department, for example. And of course, for the IT admins, they are have less tasks because the tasks have been moved down the chain to product managers, team leads, users, and so on. So less hassle, easier management, because the dev boxes themselves, they don't have to create them, and they are automatically enrolled into Intune. And the same old buzzword that's been around for years, bring your own device. The end users in this case, if they are developing something that needs to be tested on Windows, for example, they don't have to be sitting on a Windows laptop. They can be running a Linux device or a Mac, and then when they need to test something on Windows, they spin up a new dev box, do the testing, and delete it. So they can sit and do their work on whatever device they choose, meaning for happier users. So you can also make use, of course, of the Windows subsystem for Linux. So if you need to set something on Linux, but you only have access to, Windows laptop, you can spin up a dev box, and then you can enable the Windows subsystem for Linux and do Linux testing on that dev box as well. It's not going to be a Linux machine, but at least you can test stuff on Linux. Being built on Windows 365, which is in turn is built on Azure Virtual Desktop, means that this is tried and true technology. This is not something new, even though the DevBox service, I didn't mention that, did I? But the DevBox service is in preview as of now, and it has been for almost a year now, I think. But the technology behind it is tried and true. You have the Windows 365 control plane, which is tried and true. It's been in GA for over a year now. And the imaging handling, for example, Azure Compute Galleries, that is something that has been around for a while. Everything around the DevBox service is tried and true, even though the service itself is still in preview. The management part is also really easy for not only the IT admins, but the dev leads, the team leads. The dev boxes themselves are, as I mentioned earlier, they are always enrolled into Intune because that is part of the provisioning process. So your IT department doesn't have to worry about, a bunch of VMs in their infrastructure that they have no clue what is, because they are all running in Azure and they are all enrolled into Intune, so they have an easier time managing all of this. And I mentioned initially that it is highly customizable, and the customizability of the DevBox service is really, really high. Is that the right phrasing? You can do a lot with it, not only in terms of bringing different images and having different software in those, but you have a lot of customizability in where does a DevBox connect to, for example. I mentioned the network connections where you select the VNet they should be connected to. That could be a lockdown environment if you want to. And since the dev boxes themselves are not exposed directly to the internet, then you can use the dev boxes like for short-lived jump boxes into more lockdown environments, for example. And so you can design this service in a lot of different ways. There's a lot more customizability with the DevBox service than, for example, the Windows 365 service. And there's also a lot of other benefits to the DevBox service, but I guess I have been talking for long enough at this point, so I think we should jump to some demos. So I have prepared a little demo environment of the DevBox service. Let me go like this so you can see. And like I said, the DevBox service is split up into dev centers, projects, DevBox pools, and so on. So when you search for DevBox in the Azure portal and you go here, you see a lot of different options in documentation and help. You have the dev centers in your tenant, projects, network connections, DevBox definitions, and DevBox pools. And like I said, the network connections, they are global. So if I wanted to create a new network connection, this is where I would do so. Like click create, but the DevBox definitions, they are within each dev center. So you see there's no create button here. So going back to the, the same goes for the DevBox pools, of course, there's no create button here. But if we take a look at the network connections, since they are global, we can take a look at this one that I have configured. And, the overview gives you some basic information about it. The one thing to notice here is the network interface location. This is a resource group that the DevBox service creates automatically when you create a new network connection. And the network interfaces location, the resource group that is defined here, that is where all of the network interfaces for my DevBoxes will be located. Now, there's no option to provide your own resource group or even name it in any way you want. So yeah, you are pretty much stuck with this naming here. But like I said, it will only contain the network interfaces of your DevBoxes and pretty much nothing else. And we have the networking on the side here. This is, which virtual network and which subnet do you want your DevBoxes to be connected to. So for this network connection that I have here, I have them connected to my DevBox demo and the subnet called DevBox demo. So if I had multiple subnets, I can then split up and have some DevBoxes connected to one subnet and a bunch of others in another subnet and so on based on this network connection. Then we have some properties here, and this is basically just for viewing. So you can, view all the tags and stuff. You can view all the setup in terms of domain join type. This is the only place to, see it after you have created the network connection. So you can see that this is a network connection that will join my DevBoxes to Azure AD. This is not something that will join them to a hybrid scenario, joining them to Azure, to Active Directory and to Azure AD. But if I did configure it like that, then I could at least view the domain name and organizational unit and so on here. One other thing to mention about the network connections is back on the overview here, you have a status tab. And this is pretty neat because the DevBox service does routinely do a couple of checks on your network connections, making sure that they are functioning and that they are ready to, be used to create new DevBoxes, which is, nice to know that they are working, because you don't want your users to not be able to create DevBoxes because of an infunctional network connection. Among the things that these checks are is verifying that from the VNet and subnets that you select, the DevBoxes will be able to connect to the control plane, for example. If you have a hybrid joining network connection, then it will check to verify that it can reach the domain and that the username and password is correct and able to join computers to the domain and so on. So this is really neat because it allows you as an IT admin to know that your network connections are working so that the product managers and users can do their thing. So going back to the DevBox service itself, we can take a look at the DevBox definitions here. So as you can see, I have two of them in my setup here. I have one located in Dev Center 01 and I have one in Dev Center 02. We will get into those a bit later. But if we take a look at the, let's take a look at this Win11 DevBox definition. You have some basic information, of course, and that's just about it. There's not a whole lot of information here, but once we go into the Dev Center, you can see that there's lots more to do. So this is basically just some information telling you which images are used and the version of that image, and if there's errors in the image and which Dev Center it is for or configured in, because this whole view that we're using here is basically the IT admin's perspective of the service. So it makes sense for them to have one place to look at all DevBox definitions across all dev centers. And the same goes for the DevBox pools. Like I mentioned, there's no create button here because these are located within projects. And since this is the IT admin's perspective of things, they can view DevBox pools across all projects within all dev centers. So you can see that I have 3 different pools in 2 different projects. You can see the DevBox definition being used and the network connection being used. Because if you remember, the DevBox pools are consisting of the DevBox definition and the network connection used to create DevBoxes. The same thing here goes, there's not a whole lot of things you can do with the DevBox pools here. You can just basically view basic information about them. But if we go into a dev center, let's do dev center 01 for now. Again, you get a pretty good overview and some tasks that you need to do or perform in order to have your dev center up and running completely. So not all of these are for DevBox. You have, for example, environment types and catalogs. Those are not related to the DevBox service at all, but the dev center is used for other services as well. So don't be scared and think that, I have to do all of these tasks in order to get my DevBoxes working, but we need to do at least some tasks in order to get the DevBox service running. If we jump down to the identity part here, you have the option to either use a system assigned identity or a user assigned identity. And this identity is basically only used when the dev center is connected to an Azure Compute Gallery. I mentioned earlier that the images that you use for DevBox are to be contained in an Azure Compute Gallery. And this identity that you specify here is what is going to be used to access that compute gallery. So that's the identity part. Let's scroll on down to the networking part. And this is all the network connections that are available to DevBox pools within this dev center. Because remember, the network connections are global and can be used across all dev centers and DevBox pools. You have the Azure Compute Galleries if you use them. If you want to bring your own galleries, your own images, then this is where you would add them. And in order to add one, you need to have a system assigned or user assigned identity. So you see this error message here that the dev center does not have a system assigned or user assigned identity, and you cannot add galleries until you have an identity added. But yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the IT admins would configure the compute galleries with images, different versions of images, and then these can be connected to dev centers so that the images in those galleries can be used to create dev boxes. And then we have the DevBox definitions over here. And at this point, you are able to do a bit more with these DevBox definitions. So these are created in the dev center. So this is an IT admin task in the DevBox service to create these DevBox definitions. So if we take a look at this current Windows 11 DevBox definition, you can see that it's using the Azure Marketplace image that contains Windows 11 Enterprise plus the OS optimizations. These are the OS optimizations for Teams and stuff like that. So they're not really that useful in dev boxes, but this enables Microsoft to maintain one type of image instead of having specific ones for the DevBox service. They do actually have a couple of specific images for the DevBox service, those have the Visual Studio Enterprise pre-installed, I believe, or the Visual Studio Pro, I think. So there are a couple of DevBox specific images in the Azure Marketplace as well. So you can see that we have selected to use the latest version, which at this point is 1.0.0. The image doesn't have any errors. And you can see the size that we have selected and the last time it was modified. I can go ahead and edit this one. And you see that I can select from a couple of different images. Like I mentioned, you also have these Visual Studio Enterprise and Pro images. And you have the ability to select the version of the image. Now, this is useful if, for example, you need a specific version of a custom image. It's not so useful for the Azure Marketplace images, but if you have a bunch of custom images that are, different versions, you can go back and use a old image if you so want. But leaving this at latest will make sure that the DevBoxes made from this DevBox definition will always be created with the latest version of the image. So we have an option to select the compute for this DevBox. I'm not sure why I only have one selection, but I do. And then you have a couple of different options on the storage part. So these things make up what the dev boxes will look like. And the same thing, if I would create, I would have the exact same options, give it a name, select the image to be used, the image version, compute, and then storage. So that's the DevBox definitions. We could move on down to projects at this point. Because remember, you have one or multiple dev centers which have one or multiple projects. In this dev center, the dev center 01, I have two projects. I have demo project 01 and demo project 02. So if we go into demo project 01, there is one thing that is really important when you create your first project, because even though you have owner rights on the subscription, for example, where this is created, that doesn't necessarily mean that you get all the access you need to configure this project completely. Because remember, the DevBox service is based on a separation of tasks and roles. So once you have created the project, that is an IT admin's task to create the project. But then you would have to go into access control and add a role assignment. And you see that you have two specific DevBox roles here. You have the Dev Center DevBox user, which allows people to create and delete dev boxes themselves. But then you also have the Dev Center project admin, which allows for a team lead or project lead to assign access to others in this DevBox project. So without this project admin, you lose the option also to create DevBox pools, for example. And DevBox pools are, where the DevBoxes are created from. So remember to assign the project admin role. But if you only create a new project and don't assign that to yourself, then you would not see the DevBox pools button at all. So if you find yourself lacking the DevBox pools selection here, then that might be the reason why. But let us go into the DevBox pool. And you see that I have a demo pool 01. So that DevBox pool uses the definition Windows 11 8 vCPU, and then use the network connection NCAAD join. So if I wanted to create a new pool, I would hit create, give it a beautiful name. I would select a DevBox definition that the IT admins have gracefully provided to me. And I can select a network connection, and I can also select what kind of privileges that my users should have on their dev boxes. Now, being dev boxes, this would, I assume, usually mean that they also need, admin privileges on their local devices, because devs like to, a lot of the time they have a need to install stuff, for example, on their devices. So I reckon that local administrator would be the most used of these privileges, but you also have the option to set them as a standard user. Another thing that you have an option to is to enable auto stop. I will get to the costs around DevBox a little bit later on, but this will allow you to cut down on costs, because the DevBoxes will cost money when they are running, but not as much when they are not running. So also a good thing to have, meaning that the DevBoxes in this case will always shut down at 7 p.m. at night. You also have to confirm that you have Azure Hybrid Benefit licenses in order to use the DevBox service. So I have this pool here, and if I wanted to manage it as a project manager, for example, I can click on the pool, and now I can see all the DevBoxes that are created in this pool. So you see that Petter, in this case, have created the demo of DevBox 01. The state is stopped, so this will not cost me a lot of money. So that is good. If it was running, I would have the option here to stop it. I do also have, I think, the option to delete it. And of course, I can also start it if I wanted to, but that is also something that users can do themselves. So if I wanted to override the users, if a user left the company without deleting all the DevBoxes, for example, then I, as a project admin, can go ahead and delete them for them. And of course, you see the image that was used and the version, which is neat because if you change the image or the image version that is to be used when creating DevBoxes, this doesn't mean that all existing DevBoxes get updated with that new image. This is kind of the same with Windows 365. If you update which image to be used, then that doesn't affect any existing DevBoxes. Then they would then need to be deleted and then recreated if they wanted to be using the new image. And that is about it, I think, from the admin's perspective of the DevBox service. I believe we could log into the DevBox service so as an user. So if we go to devbox.microsoft.com, hopefully this works. Yes, you see that I have my own DevBox here. I could open it in the RDP client or in the browser. I have the option to start it because it is now stopped. And I can also delete it if I wanted to. So if I wanted to create a new DevBox, then I would simply go to New DevBox, give it a good name. Then I would select a project because, as a user, I can be part of multiple projects. So I will, for this matter, select the demo project 01, for example. You see that since there is only one pool in demo project 01, then this is pre-selected for me. If I wanted to go back to project 02, you see that I have to select a DevBox pool. And I also get this nice little hint saying that you should select the DevBox pool closest to your physical location for optimal performance. And this is why it is a good thing that you as a project admin can select the network connection, because if your users are based in USA, for example, then it would not make sense to have all your DevBoxes created in India, for example. So you can split this up. In my setup, I only have stuff in West Europe, but if I wanted to, I can have DevBoxes, network connections, configuring DevBoxes in US or in West Europe, and I can have multiple ones if I wanted to. So selecting one of these pools, I can then hit create, and then the DevBox will begin its provisioning process. And if I wanted to log in to my existing DevBox, I can select open in browser, and this is pretty much the exact same as for a Windows 365 connection in the browser. You have the option to use it pretty much as you want, but it is limited in stuff like clipboard access, for example, because you don't have the option to copy paste easily between your local device and your dev box in this matter. As you can see, the dev box is now starting because when I connected to it, it was still stopped. So this is also kind of neat that you don't have to go on ahead and start it before connecting to it. But yeah, it does take a little while to boot up, so the connection experience isn't all that good when they are stopped. But yeah, once this is started up and I'm logged in, it's basically just a Windows 11 machine. It's not really much else. As you can see, this is the second sign-in now. That is to my dev box, and it failed. Bit of finger troubles there. So yeah, this is both how the DevBox service looks from an admin, a project lead's, and a user's perspective. So I guess we could jump on back to our presentation because it's time to talk about how much the DevBox service costs. And first and foremost, you need to have a license to be able to use the DevBox service. The users connecting to DevBoxes, the users creating DevBoxes, they need to have a couple of licenses. And the license requirements here is actually the exact same as for Windows 365 Enterprise. You need to have a license for Windows, for Intune, and for Azure AD. And you could, of course, buy a bundle that has all these, like the Microsoft 365 Business Premium. But yeah, you need to have these licenses in order to use the DevBox service. But the DevBox service itself is consumption based, as opposed to Windows 365, which is license based. So the consumption is split up into different parts. You have the compute part and you have the storage part. So the DevBox service here differs from like Azure Virtual Desktop or normal Azure Virtual Machines in that they don't use the VM sizes that we're familiar with from the Azure side of things. It's more similar to the Windows 365 way of doing things, where the CPU is tied to the amount of RAM and so on. So if you want 4 vCPUs, then you get 16 gigs of RAM. If you want 32 gigs of RAM, you get 8 vCPUs. Unlike Windows 365, with the DevBox, the storage is decoupled from the compute and it is decoupled from the compute cost. So you can select one type of compute and another type of storage. As you saw when I was creating a DevBox definition earlier, I was able to choose a compute and I was able to choose a storage. And those have their different prices. Now, the prices currently look like this. For the cheapest of the DevBoxes, it's about $0.50 per hour. These costs, the compute cost, can be cut down by turning off the DevBoxes. Like I showed you, a project admin can go ahead and start or stop the DevBoxes they have responsibility for, or a user can do that themselves. And you also have the option to automatically turn off your DevBoxes at a given time. When they are turned off, the compute cost does not count. That you don't spend compute when they are not running, which is, logical and neat. But you will still have to pay for the storage. So, it's not a whole lot, but you have to pay for the storage. And this means that you can't just turn off your DevBoxes and then go ahead and think like, oh no, it's fine, it doesn't cost anything because I've turned it off. No, you still have to pay for the storage. So yeah, that's the pricing of the DevBox service itself. But it is one more thing that you need to factor in, and that is the networking costs. This isn't a whole lot, but it is a cost. And this is the same as for other Azure stuff. It's the Azure traffic from that VNet. Because remember, you need to bring your own VNet to connect your dev boxes to. And you have things like egress traffic, for example. Yes, the first 100 gigs per month is free, but if you have dev boxes that regularly do a whole lot of outbound traffic, then you could easily reach this limit. But it's not a whole lot, but you still need to consider this in your planning. And with that, we have come to the Q&A part. So let me see. When will the service be GA? I have no idea. Based on how long Windows 365 was in preview, I reckon that it's not going to be long before the DevBox service comes into GA, but to be honest, I have no insights into the roadmap, but I also haven't seen a whole lot of changes on the front end of the service lately. So yeah, that might mean that they have some troubles in the back end that they need to figure out, but it can also mean that it is pretty much feature complete and ready for GA. But my guess is as good as yours, unfortunately. With all the similarities to Windows 365, when should we use Switch? That is a really good question, and it really comes down to how long should your dev boxes be living? Because we saw the costs for the dev boxes. The cheapest one is around $50 per hour. And that means that if you have your dev box running 24/7 for a week, then you actually reach the same cost as the license for a Windows 365 of the same specs. So if you are going to be using your dev boxes, 8 hours a day, then you quickly amount to a cost that is higher than the same for a Windows 365. So use the dev boxes when you have very short-lived and concrete needs. They should be short-lived, hence the focus on disposable dev boxes. So if you are in need of something that is, more long-lived, I guess, then you should probably go with the Windows 365 service instead. Another point to make here is that Windows 365 cloud PCs, they have the option to, back up your cloud PCs. That is not something that exists with DevBox, further proving the point that they should be short-lived. So yeah, hope that answers that question. And doesn't look like there's anyone else. So with that, I'm going to be ending this stream. If you have any more questions, leave them in the comments of this video afterwards, or ping me on Twitter or what have you. And yeah, cheers.